Does this work? Yes, it works. Okay, this is part of my health plan. I'm sorry, I'm screwing up the cameras here, but there you go. You might introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Lauren Hare from Pacific Interface and Centergrid. You didn't address today, but I have heard in other talks that you've given very eloquent presentations about the risk of the digital dark age and the need for digital vellum. Could you speak to that for just a moment?
Well, actually, I did mention the problem of digital preservation, which is approximately the same idea. So were you asleep for that part? Or? Well, okay, but yeah, right. So the term digital vellum is just a way of trying to characterize how powerful vellum, sheepskin, turned out to be in the preservation of information. And so the idea here is to create a framework in which digital content can be preserved and correctly interpreted over a long period of time. Some of us at Google are starting to experiment with ideas. There are lots of people around the world who are poking at this problem. It's not terribly coherent. There's one group called the Interplanetary File System, which is looking at ways of labeling content and preserving access to it over long periods of time that doesn't suffer from the problem of the URL failure. There's another group called the International Internet Preservation Consortium. Brewster Kahle, who runs the Internet Archive in San Francisco, is part of that. So there are efforts here and there, but again, we're going to need standards. We're going to need probably emulation technology so we can run old operating systems on emulated hardware. I have to tell you one amusing thing about trying to do that. Carnegie Mellon has a project called Olive, and it was emulating old hardware in order to run old operating systems, and they decided to demonstrate their capability to be running some old video games, except the emulator ran faster than the old computer did, and they had to slow it down in order to make the game playable again. I have a great deal of respect for the National Archives in the U.S., which is responsible for archiving our government's history. Those poor people, sometimes they just get disk drives. Literally, somebody walks in and says, "Here, it's a disk drive." It isn't even a computer. All you know, how is it encoded? What's on it? What operating system was on it? Those poor people have to try to make sense out of that and then catalog it and make it discoverable. So there's still a lot of work to be done. If you're interested in that, I'm Vint at google.com. Send me an email if you got ideas. Okay, a couple more. There's one over here. This guy has some very good ideas, by the way, because I've already had a chance to talk to him.
My name is Kees de Laat, University of Amsterdam, and from the beginning collaborated with Tom Defanti on PRP and so on. Sorry, so you hear that I'm also suffering a little bit from flu. In the last weeks, I recovered. So you had a slide where you mentioned briefly ethics, and you only alluded it to how you write code. I think that ethics is very important for teaching, because I think computer science and the things what we teach our students can become, if you wish, mass weapons of destruction. So with ethical hacking and so on, responsible disclosure. If we program cars, there are lots of issues also regarding normative behavior and law and so on. Should the program kill the driver or that person crossing the street? What are the decisions to be taken and so on? So I think that most computer science departments now need ethical boards to review what they do, just like medicine research. This is as important. What is your point of view on that?
So I agree with that. In fact, in my harangue about critical thinking, I suspect ethics should be added into that, just because of the kinds of damage that can be done by either, deliberately modifying or changing or messing up a hardware or software, but also just injecting bad information into this shared information environment, which creates potentially terrible outcomes. I won't mention the November elections in the U.S. or anything, but okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Lou Del Zampo. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the CCC. The question I have is, we ran into a situation where we migrated our listserv from a private data center to Amazon, and our reputation score went to 0. And so everything that we were able to do with hundreds of thousands of emails sent to people in our system, we were now blocked. We were throttled, blocked, people were rejecting stuff. And so I'm wondering if there's any standards body I should be poking at about this thing or something else, because spam obviously is a fact of life and all the rest of it, and I've been doing things for a while, this just confused me. So anyway, I was curious if you run into anything like that.
Well, of course, the uncharitable observation would be, well, of course that happened. You moved your stuff to Amazon. If you moved it, you know. I mean, move it to Google. I mean, it's a really good example of what we're doing to ourselves. I mean, when you think about it, we've created these reputational systems, and we've allowed them to be polluted by a variety of things. Either spam gets generated and you get on blacklists, or you end up with a lot of malware flowing around, or bots go in and reinforce negative things. In fact, if any of you were watching, ABC this morning, Good Morning America, they had a program about what happens to our brains as a result of using mobiles and laptops in the social media. And we're actually creating feedback loops that have a biological component to them, which is causing us to become addicted in the same way we get addicted to drugs or alcohol or cigarettes, because we're releasing endorphins in our head as a result of getting a thumbs up or something like that. So this is actually kind of a shocking thing. I don't have a good standards body to suggest, although maybe there should be one. Maybe we're back to this ethical question again. How do we need a body that we trust? That's hard to come by. To whom one could appeal to establish reputation, because right now the crowdsourced reputations are at risk of botnets being used to produce fake people. And just to draw your attention to this, the other day I was thinking about the Turing test. And that was a test where you had a person and a computer that were responding to another person asking questions. And if the person asking the questions couldn't tell the difference between the computer and the person, then the computer passed the Turing test. Now we have a different problem. We have a computer program that is talking to a person and a computer. And it's trying to figure out which one is the person. And if you can't tell the difference, then a botnet can pretend to be a person in the eyes of the software. That's what we face with the programs that we use today. Can't tell the difference between people and computers because the avenue through which the interaction arrives is exactly the same. And so I'm thinking about writing a little article about Turing Test 2, which is the test of the software figuring out which one is the human. And it wants to be able to tell the difference. There's a hand over there, but since you're convenient, is it okay? I'll take you, number 2.
Thank you. I'm glad it's nice to see you have the NSFNet diagram, because I was one of the original team. Yeah, I'm Jessica Yu from UC Irvine. I used to work for Merit. You mentioned about using artificial intelligence to improve the translation, Google Translate. I can actually see the difference because a couple of years ago, because I'm a native Chinese speaker, and I tested Google Translator for Chinese. It was really, really bad. Nothing makes sense. So now I tried again. It's improved a lot. So I just want to give you this feedback.
So I have a little story to tell. This reminds me of one. I was in Heidelberg, and I wanted to look to see what the weather was going to be that day. So I logged into, I said weather.com, and a website popped up. It turned out it was a German website, only I didn't know that because the translation was so fast that it looked like it was just an English language website. So I'm looking at the weather report, and it says, probably rain 0, probability of snow 0. Then it said probability of ice cream 0. So I took a screenshot, and I went over to my Heidelberg friend. I said, "You have ice cream storms here?" It turned out that the German word for ice cream is ice, E-I-S. It's also the word for hail. And there wasn't enough context for the translator to figure it out, so it picked ice cream. I thought it was cool. Okay, I got one back there.
Hi, I'm Jim Pepin from Clemson University. Hi, I have a semi-philosophical question. Going back to the old days when you and I were younger, yeah, I still have hair. There was a small number of people who did this, a finite number. We sort of knew each other. It was 50 people, 100 people, maybe 30 people, whatever. And if you come to today, there's thousands of people, and there's IETF and all this other stuff. And the other thing that's different about today is back then, those 30 or 40 people knew how their computers and operating systems and everything worked at a very detailed level. People coming out of college today know APIs that are 14,000 layers above the bottom of what actually makes this work. And what worries me is, what is our future when we have sock puppet support, when we have things that are done by people that don't quite understand what's going on, and it's done by thousands of people instead of dozens of people?
So it's a good question. By the way, who is a big debate right now with the. You'll be wondering why I'm bringing this up, but I'll come back around. The European GDPR standards for privacy disrupted the who is question, because when it was first designed, that protocol was just intended to let us know who was responsible for which network if there was a problem. And we were a bunch of geeks, and we were all trying to make the network work, and it didn't occur to any of us that anybody would not want it to work. So who is was a natural evolution of the development of the internet. But of course now in this open environment, it's a big issue. Some people don't want it to be known who they are or which domain names they have or anything else. Now, to come back to your question, open source may help us a little, because you'll be able to see inside more deeply than you would normally in the case of proprietary software. On the other hand, open source is also its own danger, because people simply grab software from GitHub or SourceForge or something, throw it into a device, and don't pay a whole lot of attention to the origins of the software and how well it works or whether it has bugs or anything else. So there's a tension between the open source and its potential to help us understand what's going on and the likelihood that somebody won't bother. And to make matters worse, a lot of functionality is sliding down into the hardware where it's not very visible for a lot of the programmers. I don't know what to do about that. I'm sorry? Yes, exactly. Okay, so I think maybe we better make this the last one, because I'll be chewing up too much of your time. But there, I see a hand over on the wall. The handwriting is on the wall.
My name is Petrus Williams. I'm with the J. Paul Getty Trust. And there's a lot of debate nowadays about whether or not the government moving away from net neutrality will have an impact on how the internet operates. So I just wanted to get your thoughts about that.
This is question number 104. Number 101 is, did you have any idea what was going to happen when you started this project? The answer is no. Okay, so on net neutrality, I was very unhappy to see the decision made by the FCC. And you can understand where this comes from. When in the 1990s, mid-1990s, there were 8,000 internet service providers in the United States alone, because you dialed up to get to a modem bank. And if you didn't like the service, you could dial a different number. And so it was really easy to switch. There was plenty of competition. Along comes the broadband technology, and you had to have a physical piece of equipment in your house, and it could only be supplied by a telephone company with fiber or digital subscriber loops, or a cable company with a cable modem. So you ended up having much less competition. In fact, 0, 1, or 2, depending on whether you were in the rural part of the country, the suburban part, or the downtown urban part. So suddenly, competition went away. And the concern then was that these companies that were providing broadband access to the internet were also beginning to verticalize their services to provide more things that they could offer to subscribers. So Comcast, for example, makes acquisition of NBC and video archives and the like in order to provide a broader range of vertical services, just by way of example. So the possibility is that the party supplying the broadband channel might see competition through that channel from other providers, for example, streaming video from a provider other than your own content. And you could imagine a motivation for interfering with the other guy's content in order to drive the customer over to your own. I'm not saying anybody did that, but there was this concern that that might happen. So, among other things, the FCC of the time introduced a set of net neutrality rules, which basically said that you would not engage in anti-competitive behaviors, that visibly interfering with performance or blocking sites or charging one company, giving one company access to a broadband path while the others got worse quality paths. All that is very simple anti-competitive component. The big issue is that a lot of the parties who objected to this idea made it sound as if the engineers believed that net neutrality meant every packet had to be treated exactly the same way and you couldn't charge people for more usage, none of which is true. I mean, the internet has the ability to distinguish different packet types. It has the ability to give low latency service or broader or higher speed service. And those things were all accounted for, but they were used as an obfuscating argument against net neutrality. So we oscillated back and forth. Once net neutrality rules were adopted by way of the Title II part of the FC or the Telecom Act Charter, which is telecommunications, at least there was a basis for the FCC to enforce the net neutrality rules. And Tom Wheeler's chairmanship of the FCC actually exercised that authority after the Supreme Court told it that if you leave the internet in Title I, which is an unregulated service, that you have no ability to enforce net neutrality. So Wheeler got his FCC to put internet back into Title II, which is telecommunications. The problem is Title II has all kinds of other bells and whistles associated with telephony, charging structures and billing and all kinds of other stuff, not relevant to the internet. So the ideal thing would be to have a new title in the Telecom Act specific to internet, putting in those neutrality rules specifically. At this stage of the game, it's not clear whether the Congress will be capable of passing a new act, Telecom Act, in order to enshrine those principles. And of course, it isn't even clear if they did open up the Telecom Act and add a new title for internet, what would be in that section. You could end up with something worse than we have now. So that's an open question, frankly. I'm hoping that we will get to the point where we can move the internet regulations into a new title in the FCC. I'm persuaded that the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has a role to play in anti-competitive behaviors and other kinds of harms visited upon the subscribers and consumers of the internet services. But I still think that there is a role to play in net neutrality at the communications layer to assure that we don't have anti-competitive behaviors at that broadband IP channel. So that's where I stand on this. I don't know how it's all going to come out, but with folks like you arguing strongly, we may succeed in getting these back into the right place. I know you have your hand up. Louis, do we have time for one more? Okay, so this is ladies' choice.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. I'm Sunny McPeak with the California Emerging Technology Fund. Couldn't resist, if you're talking about net neutrality, we in California have 31% of our residents who are either unconnected or underconnected. So we say to the FCC and Chairman Pai, we're as concerned about net equality as we are net neutrality. So as the chief evangelist for the internet with Google, what can you do to help us get everybody online?
Well, thank you. So one answer is I showed up here. Because that's partly what CENIC is all about. I am right now, of course, a big fan of trying to do everything we can to get everybody up online. But remember, there are hazards of being online, and so I'm very conscious of wanting to get people up online knowledgeable about how to do safe networking, how to be safe and secure in this online environment. I am underwriting some work by Matthew Rantanen. It's a first foray into getting some of the First Nations online in the San Diego area, but I'd like to expand that if that's possible, and there are several other places to look. It's a non-trivial exercise in the U.S. to get rural connectivity up. The FirstNet program, which will involve the implementation of additional towers, looks to me like a physical opportunity to extend, but I don't know whether the operator, AT&T, is necessarily interested in participating in such a program, but sharing of towers could be another possible means by which we could extend access to the internet. I'd certainly like to see that happen. With regard to the rest of the world, we have a Next Billion Users program at Google. In that program, we put free Wi-Fi services in the railroad stations in India. So, because there was fiber running along the railroad tracks, and so we took advantage of that and put up Wi-Fi. So now we're watching teachers take their students to the railroad stations to do their homework, which is great. We also put up a wholesale network in Kampala, Uganda, and then offered at wholesale prices to sell internet service through retailers, so there's some competition. The consumers have some choice. We did that in Ghana as well, and now we've formed a joint venture called C Squared in Africa to try to replicate that idea in other parts of that continent. So I'm also going to show up at the PIC ISOC meeting coming up in Vanuatu to talk to the Pacific Island countries, which are increasingly able to get access to fiber, much to my surprise. I would have lost the bet that many of these island countries would ever get access to fiber. Now we're seeing more opportunity for that, partly because so many companies, including Google, are starting to build optical fiber undersea cables in order to connect their data centers together. So I'm feeling more optimistic now than I ever did before that we will get the other 3.5 billion people up and online. Eric Schmidt told me I wasn't allowed to retire because I'm only half done. And so I'm working on that. Okay, thank you all very much for letting me join you.